About a month ago I did a ride which was really muddy, and during the ride I had a lot of mud collect around the forks in this area, and it actually pulled the spring off the dust seal, and the dust seal dropped down and a lot of mud entered the dust seal and also the oil seal, and I noticed some oil leakage. After that ride I used a seal mate, which is a thin piece of plastic, to clean out the oil seal, and it seemed to work. But after the ride last week I had major oil leakage from the oil seal. So this week's video is going to be about how to replace the fork oil seal. To change the oil seals you need a few tools. Obviously you need some new seals. I bought this kit which includes new bushes. That's the part number there. And then you need some new oil. I use the WP oil, which is 4 weight. And then tools. I've got this dust seal remover tool. You can use a flat bladed screwdriver if you don't have one of those. And then you need a 24mm fairly thin wrench to remove the fork cap, and a 50mm for the fork cap top. And then for the seal installation you can use one of these tools which slips over the top of the fork tube and prevents tearing of the seals. If you don't have one of these you can wrap some electrical tape or use a plastic bag over the top. You'll need a heat source. I use this gas to heat up the fork tube when removing the oil seals and putting new ones in. Oil seal driver for 48mm forks. You obviously need something to measure the oil out, something to drain the old oil into, and a oil level setting tool as well. First step is to remove the front wheel. When you're working on the suspension, it's important to have it nice and clean so no dirt gets inside the suspension. I've already cleaned the bike. If you haven't cleaned the whole bike, make sure you clean the suspension unit before you start actually disassembling it. The next step is to fully back off the adjuster. Before you do it, make sure you know what setting it's currently on. I already know, so I'm just going to go ahead and back it out fully. And then while the forks are still in the triple clamps, I like to loosen the fork cap. Before you loosen the cap, make sure the top triple clamp bolts are loosened off so it doesn't pinch on the cap threads. And then you can go ahead and use the wrench and loosen the cap. You don't need to fully take it off, just loosen it. And then you can go ahead and loosen the bottom triple clamp pinch bolts. And sometimes the fork just slides straight out, so be careful, especially if you're standing underneath it, because it can drop on your toes. And then carefully slide the fork out. Next you can take off the fork guard, just held on with 3 bolts. And now is a good time to clean off all the dirt that you couldn't get off when you're washing the bike. You can use some parts cleaner on it and a cloth. Be careful if there's a lot of dirt on the fork tube. It's best not to rub up and down, because you could get scratches that way. Much better to go around in this motion, clean it off. And that's looking pretty clean now. To remove the existing oil seal and put new oil seal in, it's recommended to heat up this area of the fork tube. So you really need to pull down this plastic protective ring. I've also got carbon guards on, and I've put this electrical tape on to seal out dirt, so I'm going to remove the tape as well. I don't want it melting or anything. So once you've thoroughly cleaned the fork, you can remove the fork cap. So as I showed, I've already loosened the fork cap while it was in the triple clamps. So that's pretty easy to do. And then drop the tube down, and then you want to get your container to drain the oil into. So just drain the oil in there. The bike's done 60 hours. It's a little bit dirty, but there's no contamination. If you get water in there, it goes milky, but there's none of that, which is good. The next step is to take the fork cap off, and this is a 6-stage model, so it has the preload adjuster on the top. And the method to take cap off is to hold the nut underneath, so you need a 24mm wrench on that, and then to undo it using the preload adjuster. If you have a standard model, you can just use a fork cap wrench and undo it that way. If you use a fork cap wrench on the 6-stage model, you stand a chance of damaging the preload adjuster, so it's recommended not to do it that way. So what I've done is I took an old socket and cut a slot in it so it fits onto the preload adjuster like that, and then I can use a wrench and take it off safely. So I put that on, and then hold my wrench. And then it comes off pretty easily. And once the cap is off, you can remove the spring. And it came off with a spacer, so make sure you put that back on when you reassemble the fork. Okay, the next step is to loosen the cartridge lower bolt. One tool I forgot to mention that you need is a 17mm hex. That fits in the bottom bolt like that. If you've got a vise, it's a very easy job. Use some soft jaws, hold the axle and just loosen like that. If you don't have a vise, you can put the axle through, and then probably easiest if you put it on the ground, kind of support it with your foot, and you can use the wrench to loosen the nut like that. And then take it out, and it's a good idea to put an oil pan underneath in case some oil comes out. I'm actually going to loosen it and then take it fully out over the oil pan. Quite a bit of oil came out. Once you've drained all the oil out, you can take the damper rod out, and it just pulls out. And then fully drain the rest of the oil. can drain the oil out of the damper by moving it to and fro, and then wipe it off with a clean cloth. So this is what the fork oil looks like after 60 hours of use. It's not super dirty, but probably needed changing. Okay, so here you can see all the parts I've disassembled so far. I've got the fork tubes still assembled, the fork cartridge, the fork spring with a spacer, the lower base valve, which required the 17mm hex socket, and the fork cap. The next step is to disassemble the fork tubes. So place a cloth on the ground and then rest the fork tube on the cloth, and then use a large flat bladed screwdriver. And the method is to very carefully, without slipping, press the ring down and you work around the fork. It's a little bit tricky because it's quite stiff, but take your time, don't rush it, and work round the ring, just pressing down. You don't want to slip, otherwise you put a big gouge in the fork tubes. So just do it slowly. That one's very stiff. There we go. And it's off now. Then the next step is to take the dust seal off. I have this special tool which is designed specifically for doing this. If you don't have this, you can use a flat bladed screwdriver. Whatever you use, you need to do it very carefully. Make sure you don't slip. Because this blade is very thin, it slides in quite easily. Slide it in and then just ease the dust seal off. Pretty easy to do. You see there's quite a lot of oil in there, so wipe that off. And then there's a snap ring down inside here which you need to remove, so I'm going to put it back on the floor and remove that. Okay, so put the fork tube back on the ground on a cloth, and then using a small flat bladed screwdriver you can remove the snap ring which holds the oil seal in. Again, you need to do this very carefully so you don't scratch the inner tube, and then just run it round and it pops out quite easily. The next step is to remove the oil seal, and in the manual it recommends heating this area of the tube to about 50 degrees C. So I'm going to clamp it in the vise with a soft jaw, and using a gas burner heat up this area. That's probably enough. Remove it from the vise and then just pull it out, and it pulls the oil seal straight out. So these are all the parts that I'm going to replace. You got the dust seal, the snap ring, the oil seal, and then there's a large washer there, the outer tube bush and the inner tube bush. So I've got all new parts, so I'm going to take these off and replace them. To remove the inner tube bushing, you can just use a screwdriver, spread it apart, slide it off, and then the other parts will just slide off. If you're doing this for the first time, make sure you understand which way the oil seal goes on. It has this spring at the bottom, so when you put the new one on, make sure it's the right way round, otherwise you have big problems. So that's all the parts off. It's this area you need to basically put something protected protective over when you put the new parts on to stop them getting damaged. If you don't and just put them on like this, you could well tear the seals. Then it's a good time to clean off the tubes thoroughly with some parts cleaner. So the outside is pretty straightforward, just spray it on and wipe it down clean. The inside, you can spray parts cleaner inside, and what I like to do is push a cloth down, and it's a little bit tricky without something long, but a bit of rod, make sure it doesn't have any sharp bits on, and then you can push the cloth down all the way and then push it out. Like that, and that should leave it nice and clean. You can see how much dirt came off, and then do the same with the outer tube as well, cleaning inside. Push the cloth in, push it right through. When you can push out the other end. And once that's done, you can start the reassembly. These are all the new parts ready for installation. You've got the dust seal, the snap ring, the oil seal support ring, the outer tube bushing and the inner tube bushing. One thing it does recommend in the repair manual is to go around the side areas of the bushes and tidy up any sharp areas. It says to use 600. I've got 1000, which I think will be fine because there aren't any major defects. So I just go around like this, being careful not to damage the coated area. You really just want to get the side bit and go around both sides. And then once you've done this, clean it off with parts cleaner to get rid of any dust or debris. And do the same for the outer tube bushing. Okay, so we can now start assembling the fork. I use this Motion Pro bullet tool, which protects the seals. When I put new seals on, I like to use some silicone grease around the seal. You don't need a huge amount, just run some around on the inside area, and I think it helps reduce stiction, and the oil seal as well. So just put a little bit of oil around. And then you can start assembling it. So the dust seal goes on first. And then the snap ring. And then the oil seal. Make sure you get the orientation correct. And then the oil seal support ring. And then the bushing, put some oil on that as well on the inner surface. Put that on. And then you take the tool off and you can put the inner tube bushing on. It slides down. And then put some oil around that as well. Okay, then you're ready to install the inner tube into the outer tube. Next step is to heat up the tube. It's recommended 50 degrees C. So it doesn't need to be super hot. Should be enough. And then you can drive the oil seal in. Once you've heated up the outer tube, rest it on a cloth grab your inner tube with everything assembled on it. Make sure the bush is down inside and that the oil support ring is down there, and then hold everything else up above the seal driver. Put your seal driver on and then drive the bush down, and you'll hear it change. The sound will change when it's fully driven in. And then drop your oil seal down and drive that in as well. Okay. And then you just need to put the snap ring in. You can use your fingers to get it started. They're usually going pretty easily. And then make sure it's pushed fully down. And you should hear a snap. It's already seated. And inspect to make sure the snap ring is fully seated all the way around, and then you can install the dust seal. Push that down just using your fingers. They usually go in pretty easily. And then wipe everything off. If there's any excess silicone grease or oil, you can just wipe that off. And that's the install of the seals complete. And you can install the protection ring as well. Just slide it down and push it right down. The next step is to install the cartridge into the tubes. I've already put the spring spacer on, so I don't have to mess around with that afterwards. Carefully slide the cartridge into the tubes, and then you want to stand the tube up and get the cartridge fully seated in the bottom. And when it just clicked in now. The top of the cartridge should be pretty much level with the outer tube. If it's sticking up high, it's not seated properly, and you'll have to wriggle it around to get it down. And then when you've got the cartridge inside, it's easiest if you've got a vise like this. Use the soft jaws to hold it securely. Get the bottom bolt, install that, and screw it in. And this needs to be torqued to 35 Newton meters. Okay. The next step is to fill the fork full of oil. You'll need 600 milliliters of oil, so carefully pour that in. And then once the oil's in, you can pull the damper up and bleed it. And you want to go to and fro slowly until you feel a smooth action. I can still feel a lot of air in the damper. Okay, that feels pretty good now, nice and smooth, and I don't feel any air in. This is the oil height adjustment tool. It's very simple. You can loosen it and change the height of the collar there to whatever setting you like. For the XPLOR fork, it's recommended to set it to 110. So you measure from this part of the collar, which sits on the outer tube, to the end of the tube, and then tighten it. So from there to there should be 110. Okay, once you've bled the fork for air, compress the fork fully, have the damper down, and then you'll need a fork oil height tool. I've already set this to 110 millimeters, which is the recommended air gap height, and then set the fork upright, and then pull a vacuum on the tool and draw out the excess oil. You can see there was a small amount that came out, and then you can remove the tool, and then that's the oil height set correctly. Then you can pull the cartridge up and install the spring. You want to do it fairly quickly so the cartridge doesn't drop down that far. And then while pulling the spring down, you can thread on the fork cap by hand. And using a 24mm open-ended wrench and your preload adjuster holder tool, you can tighten it up. And you want to torque the cap to 25 Newton meters. So I switched over to my torque wrench and I'm going to torque it to 25. Okay, then screw the cap into the fork outer tube. And you need to torque the cap as well, but it's easiest to do it when the fork is installed in the triple clamps. So I'll show you how to do that. And at this stage it's a good idea to clean off any oil that might have got on the outer tube, particularly around the area of the triple clamps. Touch the tube. So I've already put the carbon fork guard on, and I'm going to seal it up with some electrical tape to stop dirt getting behind it. It worked very well last time, so I'm going to do the same. And before applying the tape, I like to use some alcohol. This is ethanol, and it gets rid of any grease and ensures that it sticks nicely. And this is the electrical tape I'm using. It's Scotch Super 88, same as I used last time. It worked really well, so I'm going to use the same. It's best if you don't stretch it out too much, otherwise it would tend to shrink back over time. So get it lined up, then just press it down and cut it to length. So then just run some tape round top and bottom. So to install the fork, if you've got a strap like this, make sure that goes on first, and then carefully slide the fork up into the triple clamps, and make sure it's lined up at the correct mark, and it's also facing forwards in the right direction. Then you can go ahead and tighten the lower pinch bolts. These need to be torqued. So on the 6-stage, it actually has the torque marked on the triple clamp, so the lower is 15. And you want to go to and fro between the bolts until they both torque without moving. And then I've got to torque the fork cap, and that needs to be 40 Newton meters. And using the same trick, putting the torque wrench at 90 degrees to the wrench, I don't need to adjust the torque, and that's torqued now. So I could go ahead and tighten the top triple clamp to 17 Newton meters. If you have a standard model with the cast triple clamps, the torque's going to be different, so look that up in your manual. Then the last step is to check your damper setting is on the correct setting. As you backed it right out, you'll need to set it back to the setting you had it previously, or the setting you want. So I just need to install the front wheel, and that's the work complete. I have a separate video which shows how to install the front wheel, so I'm not going to show that in this video.